She signed the papers while her hands were shaking. He grabbed them without a single glance back, and I watched every second of it. I was 24 years old, sitting in my car in that parking garage, watching the most brilliant woman I'd ever met collapse against a concrete pillar, completely alone, while her husband of years walked away toward his next life, his next woman, without even looking back. I could have gone to her. I could have said something, but I didn't. And that silence, it cost us both far more than I ever imagined. What I didn't know that night, what none of us knew, was that Camilla Rhodes was carrying a secret that would eventually bring down an entire empire, a pregnancy, twin babies, and a clause buried in those divorce papers, the very ones he forced her to sign, that would legally strip Jackson Pierce of everything, his company, his fiancé, his legacy, his name. He thought he erased her. He had no idea she was about to become the most powerful person in the room. The people who try to silence you are often the ones most afraid of what you'll say when you finally speak. If this story already has your heart racing, you haven't even heard the worst of it yet. Hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me whose side you're on, and make sure you subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We're just getting started.
The next morning, the office was buzzing with carefully worded gossip, while I just stared at Camilla's empty chair. The official story was already being spun, painting Jackson as the victim of a difficult marriage. I knew better. I saw the divorce papers on the mail cart, and I could practically smell his expensive cologne on them, a scent that now felt like a warning. My heart ached for her. I knew she'd grown up in the system, that Jackson was supposed to be her safe harbor, the one who finally saw her for the brilliant mind she was. She had trusted him, molded herself to fit his life, only to be thrown away like a rough draft. We all thought she had found her escape, her forever home, but instead, he had built her a cage and then simply opened the door when he got bored. I wanted to scream. I'd sat in meetings where he'd subtly cut her down, making her doubt her own intelligence. "You're overthinking it," he'd say with a patronizing smile. "Just look pretty." I watched him chip away at her, piece by piece, until she became as silent and polished as the glass on his office wall. And she'd let him. I think she believed that was the price of stability, the cost of keeping the man she loved. I received the voicemail from our boss. The one about taking the day off. Ready? How could she ever be ready? She had erased herself for him, becoming the perfect, supportive wife who never made waves, who kept her own incredible talents hidden so he could have the spotlight. Now, who was she supposed to be? I felt sick with the knowledge that my silence had made me complicit in her erasure. I never said a word when people dismissed her as just the CEO's wife. I knew she had one of the sharpest analytical minds in the company, that her IQ was off the charts. She'd helped me once, quietly fixing a mistake in my projections that would have gotten me fired, and never took an ounce of credit. She built everything in her life alone, without fanfare, and I just watched as it was all torn down. A few days later, her desk was cleared out, her personal effects gone. The only thing left was the beige sweater she'd left on her chair, the one I'd seen her wear when she was stressed. It looked so small and lonely there. The sight of it was a constant, nagging reminder of my own failure to be a decent human being. I heard she was gone, had left the company entirely, the home, the marriage, her career here, all gone. I felt a flicker of defiance for her, a small, stubborn ember of anger under all my fear. Chicago became a city of ghosts for me too. Every corner of our building reminded me of my cowardice. Then, months later, I overheard Jackson and Sienna in the kitchen. They were laughing. They were crafting a new narrative, spreading rumors that Camilla had been unstable, incompetent, trying to poison her name so no one would question his version of events. It was then that my guilt turned into something else. It turned into resolve. I couldn't let him do that. I couldn't let him destroy her future after he'd already shattered her past. I started digging. I knew it was a risk. I was just a junior analyst, and he was the king of our little corporate world. But the image of her face in the parking garage, so utterly broken, wouldn't leave me. I thought of her out there somewhere, maybe in some big, lonely city, trying to rebuild while he was here, systematically burning every bridge she might have left behind. It wasn't fair. I thought about how she'd have no one to defend her, no one to speak the truth. This place was big enough, busy enough, and loud enough to drown out one small, inconvenient truth, but I couldn't let it be drowned out anymore. I had to be the one to make a sound. My temporary workspace was my kitchen table. I spent my nights sifting through old project files, my radiator hissing in the quiet apartment. I wasn't looking for a smoking gun, just a single piece of truth. And then I found it. The initial framework for the Pierpoint acquisition, a project that had netted Jackson millions, and a promotion. His name was all over the final presentation, but the original file, buried deep in the archives, was all hers. Her analysis, her strategy, her genius. It was dated a week before he told her it was a dead end, only to present it as his own a month later. He hadn't just broken her heart. He'd stolen her work. This was my chance to undo my silence. I saw him in the park once from a distance, with a new man who looked kind. She seemed different, holding her belly with a quiet strength I hadn't seen before. That image gave me the final push. Tonight, sitting at my desk long after everyone else had gone home, I attached the file to an anonymous email. My hands were shaking, just like hers had been that night. My message was simple, addressed to a board member known for his integrity. Look at the metadata. Ask the right questions. It wasn't a grand gesture. It might not change everything, but as I hit send, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was a small whisper against his roar, but it was no longer silence. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like hope. I remember the first time I felt the weight of my silence. It was on the rooftop of the Pierce Tower, under a brilliant California sun. I was just an assistant, supposed to be invisible, but I saw everything. While Camilla was alone in New York, trying to heal, Jackson Pierce was throwing a party. Not a quiet gathering, but a spectacle designed to shout his victory from the heavens. Influencers and investors buzzed around, but my eyes were fixed on him. He sat there, a king on his throne, dressed in a flawless navy suit. His hand wasn't just on Sienna Vale's leg. It was staking a claim. She smiled for the cameras, all sweetness and light, but I'd seen her type before. There was a sharp, hungry ambition beneath that pretty face. I knew how to fade into the background, a skill that lets you hear things not meant for you. She was a pro at getting what she wanted, and it was clear she was aiming for the whole kingdom. I saw him lean in, a gesture that looked out affectionate to the cameras, but felt like a brand to me. His touch was about possession, not love. "Any word from the board?" I heard her murmur, her voice a ghost against the party's noise. "The merger goes through Monday," he answered, his voice thick with arrogance. "We'll own the market." Then she asked about his ex-wife, her tone dripping with false concern. "Camilla?" he sneered. "She's nothing now, probably crying her eyes out somewhere, which isn't my concern anymore." I watched Sienna hide a triumphant little smile. She knew his pride was his biggest weakness, and I realized then she was using it. But I could see the annoyance flash in her eyes. Even she didn't like that Camilla still occupied a sliver of his thoughts. even as an irritation. A few feet away, I saw his mother, Evelyn Pierce, watching them. Her disapproval was a cold front in the warm LA air. She was old money, and to her, Sienna was just a vulgar distraction. "He's making a terrible mistake," she whispered to her sister, loud enough for me and Jackson to hear. "That girl is no Camila." I saw his jaw clench. He hated the comparison because he knew it was true. Camilla was the only one who ever saw the man, not the monster, but his ego always screamed louder than his heart, so he ignored it. My mother will come around," he muttered to Sienna, trying to reassure her. "They'll all accept you after the wedding." Sienna's smile grew sharp. "As long as it's soon." "It will be," he promised. He had no idea the world he'd built so carefully was already fractured, all because of the night he made Camilla sign away her life. As he raised his glass to toast a future he thought was guaranteed, I felt a knot of dread for the woman he'd thrown away. A woman who was, at that very moment, carrying the secret that would bring his entire empire crashing down. For Camilla, I hoped New York was offering some peace. I knew she wasn't cured, but I prayed she was managing. I imagined her walking without breaking down, sleeping a little better. I imagined her managing her remote work, her hands steady. But I knew a man like Jackson doesn't let go of his ghosts that easily. The news broke on a Friday. I was working late, scrolling through my feed, when the headlines exploded. It wasn't just a whisper, it was a media blitz. Biotech mogul Jackson Pierce engaged to supermodel Sienna Vale. My stomach dropped. The engagement party at the Beverly Hills Hotel, hundreds of guests. I thought of Camilla, alone in her small apartment, and pictured the grocery bag falling from her hands, apples scattering across the floor like spilled secrets. No, no, no. The articles were brutal, gleeful. They talked about the pictures, Sienna's ring. They called Jackson proud. I felt sick. My own inaction made me complicit. I knew this would feel like a public execution for her. I watched the video clips with trembling hands, my own regret mirroring what I imagined her pain to be. Every headline felt like a personal failure. Jackson Pierce's new power couple. CEO rebounds in style. Ex-wife out of the picture. My chest felt tight, constricted by the shame of what I'd witnessed and done nothing about. Then I saw the interview. The reporter asking about his previous marriage. Sienna leaned into Jackson, all grace and venom. And her laugh? It was a beautiful, cruel sound. "Well, everyone outgrows someone, don't they?" He said nothing. He didn't defend the woman who built him up. He just pulled Sienna closer, letting the cameras capture his betrayal. That's when I knew I couldn't just watch anymore. My hands clenched around my phone. He'd assigned me to take candid photos at the brunch. I scrolled through them until I found the one. Jackson, raising his champagne glass. I zoomed in. On his wrist was the watch, the one Camilla gave him, the one he told her he'd lost. It wasn't lost. It was just waiting for a better audience. With a shaking finger, I sent the photo from a burner number. Just the picture, with that watch circled in red. It was a small thing, but it was the truth. It was a start. It wasn't about revenge. It was about giving her a weapon. The pain wouldn't disappear, but maybe it could be forged into something else, something like steel. I didn't know then that someone else was already on their way to her, someone braver than me. But I knew my tiny act of rebellion had sent a crack through his perfect facade. The news about the babies broke a few weeks later, and the office descended into chaos. I stayed quiet, watching the fallout, hearing the whispers. They said an investigator named Harper was involved, that Camilla wasn't fighting alone anymore. I remember the first knock because it was tentative, just like my courage. The second one, firmer, made me jump in my armchair. "Camilla?" A man's voice called, deep and steady. It wasn't the ex-husband. I knew his grating tone all too well. This was different. It's Adrian Crowell, he said. We met in the park. I'd seen him there, watching her with a quiet kindness she desperately needed. I should have been the one to check on her, especially after hearing her muffled sobs through the wall all afternoon. Instead, I sat here, a coward. I... I'm not accepting visitors. Her voice trembled back. A pause hung in the hallway, thick with my own shame. I saw the news, he said gently. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. That simple question was a punch to my gut. I hadn't asked. I, her neighbor for 3 years, had never once asked. I crept to my peephole, my heart pounding a guilty rhythm. I saw her open the door, just a sliver, revealing a glimpse of her tear-streaked face. The man, Adrian, didn't flinch. He just stood there, his expression one of pure, respectful concern. He didn't pry or offer empty platitudes. He just saw her. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low. I watched her hesitate, then retreat into her apartment. I knew what it looked like inside. I'd heard the grocery bag tear and the apples roll across the floor an hour ago. I had done nothing. But this stranger, he didn't even seem to notice the mess. Through the crack in the door, I saw him kneel and start picking up the scattered fruit. "You don't have to do that," she whispered, her voice raw. "I know," he replied softly. "That's why I'm doing it." His words were a quiet indictment of my own inaction. As he put the last of the groceries away, I heard his voice drift through the wall. "Public humiliation," he said gently. "It hits harder than anyone realizes." I heard her quiet murmur, a denial that sounded paper-thin. He didn't mock her. "Of course you were," he said, his voice a balm. "Because you're human. And because he should have protected you." I heard a sob then, a raw and broken sound that made my own eyes well up. "Why does it still feel like I'm the failure?" she cried. His answer was so simple, so profound. You loved him. Love doesn't disappear just because someone doesn't deserve it. The silence that followed was heavy with truth. "You're not alone," he said finally. "Not anymore." I heard her phone buzz from my side of the wall, a violent, angry sound. I knew another headline had dropped. My own tablet had lit up with Jackson Pierce's self-serving statement. The man was a monster, polishing his image while she fell apart next door. For days I watched her through my window, a ghost haunting her own life, and I watched him, Adrian, become her lifeline. He never overstayed, never pushed. One day it was a container of soup left at her door. Another time, a small bag from a tea shop. He was a quiet, steady presence, and I saw the fog around her begin to lift, ever so slightly. He was doing what a neighbor should have done, and the guilt was a constant ache in my chest. Then came the afternoon of the phone call. I was watering my plants when I heard her voice, sharp with alarm. "Harper?" she said, the name unfamiliar. The conversation was muffled, but the tone was unmistakable. A rising tide of confusion and dread. Papers rustled on the other end of the line. "We need to talk," a woman's voice insisted. A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What now?" I heard Camilla ask if something had happened, her voice small with fear. "I was reviewing your case files," the woman said quickly, "and something wasn't right." I leaned closer to the wall, unashamed of my eavesdropping now. I had to know she would be okay. "What do you mean, not right?" Camilla asked. There was a sharp intake of breath from the phone, so clear I nearly heard it in my own living room. "Your ex-husband didn't read the full packet," the lawyer said. I heard Camilla's confused reply, something about signing under stress. "No," the woman insisted. "He forced you to sign, but he also had to sign a mirror copy, one his assistant mixed into the wrong folder." My own breath hitched. "Harper, what are you saying?" Camilla pleaded. And then came the words that changed everything. Jackson signed a forfeiture clause he didn't intend to sign. My heart stopped. Forfeiture of what? She whispered. A pause. The clause states that Jackson Pierce waives all parental rights to any child conceived before the divorce date. The room tilted. The baby. I knew it. He had no idea. The pieces clicked together, her gentle hand on her stomach, her exhaustion. It was babies. Safe. I heard her choked whisper, "But he doesn't know." The lawyer confirmed it, warning her of the fight to come. "I never wanted revenge," Camila murmured. "I just wanted peace." A tear slipped down my own cheek. "You deserve it," the lawyer said gently. As the call ended, a profound silence fell. It was broken by a soft knock. I peeked out. It was Adrian, holding 2 steaming mugs. He saw her face, and his own froze. He knew, just by looking at her, that the world had shifted on its axis. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just handed her a mug and waited. It was his patience, his unwavering stillness, that finally broke her silence. I heard her whisper it, the 2 words that held all her fear and hope. "I'm pregnant." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I heard his quiet reply. I wondered. He hadn't been blind. He'd seen her quiet suffering and waited for her to trust him. "I suspected," he clarified gently, "but I wanted you to tell me when you were ready." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I don't know how to do this alone," she finished. "You won't be alone," he promised, and the certainty in his voice was a shield. She told him everything then. I heard the story pour out of her, a torrent of pain and fear and this incredible, miraculous hope. While she unburdened her soul, I sat in my silent apartment, feeling the weight of all the times I could have reached out. He was right. It wasn't an end. It was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, I became a secret witness to her quiet rebirth. I saw her walking in the park, head held a little higher each day. I saw the light return to her eyes. She started wearing colors again, beautiful greens and warm browns that hugged the gentle swell of her belly. And every few days, he was there, a quiet guardian watching over her transformation. One Saturday, he brought her a small, beautifully wrapped box. I saw her open it later by her window. It was a forest green journal. "To write your own story again," I imagined him saying. That was it. That was my sign. My own hands, old and spotted, went to my knitting basket. I pulled out the small, soft baby blanket I'd finished last spring. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird seeking flight. I walked to her door, my small offering clutched in my hand, and for the first time in a very long time, I knocked. I remember the day I saw her leave. Just a box in her hands and a look of absolute devastation on her face. Then, months later, I saw him everywhere with Adrian, a glittering symbol of all he'd destroyed. And I did nothing. I never said a word. The guilt felt like a stone in my gut. One afternoon, while Jackson was planning his next corporate takeover, I imagined Camilla somewhere, finally feeling a flutter of hope, a tiny kick of new life. I prayed she was safe, that she was rebuilding, but I knew men like Jackson Pierce didn't just let go. They left a trail of wreckage that was bound to catch fire. While she was piecing herself together in New York, I was watching him from my desk, setting his own world ablaze without a clue. His engagement to Sienna Vale was a media circus. Our internal channels called them the next big thing. The financial blogs hailed Jackson's genius for securing his personal brand before the largest merger in biotech history. Sienna loved the spotlight, posing for every camera like it was her job. But inside these walls, a different story was unfolding. The board at Pierce Biosystems wasn't popping champagne. A few of them were livid. I overheard investors calling Sienna a brand risk, a liability, They called the timing reckless. And I heard the darker whispers, too, in the hushed tones of the executive floor. Why was the divorce so quick? Was something covered up? Where did Camilla go? Jackson just laughed it off. He thought his career was bulletproof. But the first crack showed on a Tuesday morning. It began with a bug. Our company's key medical software, the one Jackson promised would change the world of diagnostics, started spitting out garbage data during a live investor demo. The whole system crashed twice. My colleague fainted from the stress. Jackson completely lost it, screaming at a junior developer in front of everyone. The video was all over the internet in hours. Our stock dropped 3% before lunch. Sienna tried to comfort him, clinging to his arm like a designer accessory, but Jackson's fuse was short. Not now, Sienna, he snapped. The cameras caught that too. It became a meme, but the worst part? That bug wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the test server. Someone on the inside who knew his weak spot, and he had no idea who. 3,000 miles away, I hoped Camilla wasn't seeing any of this. I imagined her on a sofa, laptop glowing, just looking at the ultrasound photos. Her babies, so small and alive, safe, on a screen. I pictured her holding her belly, whispering, "You're safe, I'll protect you." But safety was an illusion, because while she was finding her peace, Jackson was losing his mind. And powerful men like him never go down without a fight. The second crack came a week later. I was delivering documents to the boardroom when I saw Chairman Lee slide a folder toward Jackson. It was full of evidence of mismanaged funds, money Jackson swore he never approved. Someone had moved research funding into a shell corporation. "Are you calling me a fraud?" Jackson demanded. "We're asking for an explanation," the chairman replied, his voice like ice. Jackson started flipping pages, his face turning pale. It made no sense, but the digital trail was undeniable. His username, his password, his digital approval. The thing is, Jackson hadn't done it. Someone was setting him up. Someone with top-level access who was smart enough to dismantle his life one piece at a time. His panic was visible. His mind was scrambling. But even then, he never thought of Camilla. He never imagined the woman he discarded could ever matter again. He didn't think his past would come back with a vengeance, and he certainly never considered that a different man, one with far more influence, was quietly letting it all happen. As the meeting broke, Jackson bolted for the elevator, clutching the folder. He didn't notice the small, satisfied smile on Chairman Lee's face. He didn't realize new deals had been made without him, and he was oblivious that his entire downfall was about to be linked to the night he made Camilla sign those papers. The whispers began just after 9 a.m. Word spreads fast in an office. I didn't know the details, only that something had happened, that there was an emergency. I tried to push it from my mind, attributing the pit in my stomach to work stress or lack of coffee. But when the office gossip started mentioning a hospital, a cold dread washed over me. I knew somehow it was about her. She was weeks away from her due date. Not yet. Not now. My hands felt cold as I thought of hers alone, dialing the one person she could count on, Adrian. I could almost hear his voice on the other end, calm, immediate. "I'm on my way. Don't move." 0 minutes later, because that's the kind of man he was, he would be there, lifting her up with a strength that was more than just physical. "It's okay. I've got you." His voice would be her anchor as the storm hit. The frantic cab ride, the pain, the fear, and Adrian, a steadying presence right beside her. By the time they got there, I imagined her being whisked away down hallways that smelled of fear and hope. "She's early," I could hear one nurse say. "Twins?" another would ask. High-risk case. Get neonatal ready. I squeezed my eyes shut at my desk. Please, not now. Not when she had finally found a sliver of peace. Adrienne would have been there the whole time, his hand holding hers, while the nurses hooked up monitors. Then, the sound of two tiny hearts, beating fast and strong, filling the silence. I pictured the tears on her face when she heard them. They're fighters, the doctor would say. They're ready to be here. Her whole body would have relaxed in a wave of relief. Hours must have flown by. Nurses rushing, doctors calling out stats, beeping machines, and Adrienne, a silent guardian by her side, rubbing her hand every time she cried out. Adrienne, she'd whisper, terrified. Through another wave of pain. I'm so scared. I know, he'd answer, his voice low. But you're not alone. I'm right here. I'm not leaving. And she would have believed him. I know she would have. Then, right before noon, with the sun finally breaking through, the first one would arrive, a small but determined cry echoing in the room. A boy, a nurse would announce. Camilla would be sobbing as they placed him on her chest for just a second. He'd be so tiny, so perfect, and her heart would just break open with a love that was fierce and absolute. Minutes later, a second cry. A girl. Camilla would laugh and cry at the same time, completely spent, as they laid the little girl beside her. Two tiny miracles. Two pieces of her heart, safe and sound. You did it, Adrienne would whisper, his own voice thick with emotion. Camilla, you did it. She'd look at him, her eyes bright. Are we okay? She'd ask. You're more than okay, he'd say. You're a warrior. The babies were probably taken to the neonatal ward to be checked on. I can see Camilla watching them go, her heart aching with fear, but swelling with more pride than she'd ever known. They were fighters, just like she had been forced to become. Later, in the quiet of a recovery room, Adrienne would be sitting with her. No cameras, no drama, just the two of them and the steady hum of hospital life. You saved us, she would say. He'd just shake his head. You saved yourself, Camilla, and you saved them. She would let her eyes drift shut, the weight of it all pulling her down into sleep. But just before she drifted off, she'd know this one thing for sure. Her life wasn't over. It was starting again. And somewhere, on the other side of the country, Jackson Pierce was about to learn a lesson that would cost him everything. The news hit our office Slack channel before lunch. I was staring at my screen, exhausted for her, when my coworker gasped beside me, holding up her phone. Oh my God, she breathed. Look, it's her. She's trending. I blinked, my blood running cold. Trending? What are you talking about? Before my coworker could explain, I saw the link pop up in the general chat. The headline was salacious, but that wasn't what mattered. My stomach clenched. What is it? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My friend slowly turned her phone toward me, and my world stopped. It was a single photo, grainy and taken from a distance, clearly by some creep in the hospital. It showed Adrienne carrying Camilla down the hall, her head resting on his shoulder, the pale blue of a hospital gown visible under his jacket. She looked breakable, tired, and achingly real. The caption beneath it read, Billionaire Adrienne Volkov's Mystery Woman. And that's when I finally broke. That was my last straw. I minimized the chat window, opened a secure email client, and attached a single encrypted file. The original diagnostic report Camilla had written months ago, the one that proved she had warned Jackson about the software's fatal flaw. I addressed it to a reporter I trusted. My hands were shaking, but I hit send. I remember the first time I saw her news break on the breakroom TV, Billionaire Adrienne Crowell at NY Mercy. Then came the photo of the bassinets, the little pink hats, and the headline that lit up every phone on the floor. I knew it was about the quiet woman in room 302. I saw the color drain from her face as she whispered, "No, this can't be real." I'd seen her with her ex-husband before, seen the way she flinched, and my silence back then felt like a stone in my gut. I heard Mr. Crowell's gentle voice. "I know." Her breath caught, and I knew she was thinking what we all were. He confirmed it. "Yes, they will." The panic was palpable, even from the doorway. She'd always looked like the world had been cruel to her. I knew men like her ex, charming and cruel, and women like his new fiancée, all sugar and venom. I heard her whisper, "I didn't want this." And my heart ached. He just sat by her bed. "You're not a mess, comma," he said. "And you didn't drag me anywhere." He paused. "But there's something you should know." Her gaze flickered up, filled with uncertainty. "I made a public statement," he told her. I saw her whole body freeze. "You what?" "To protect you," he said, his voice a steady anchor before the media could spin some vicious tale. I watched her swallow, struggling. "What did you say?" He reached for her hand so carefully, giving her every chance to refuse. She didn't. "I told them the truth," he said softly, "that you're the most courageous woman I know, that you fought for those little ones with everything you have, that I'm by your side because you deserve the support and respect this world has denied you." The tension in her throat was visible. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured. "I know," he replied, "but I wanted to." After a moment, he added, "And I never claimed they were my children." A shaky breath escaped her, but just as quickly, her phone buzzed again. Another headline, another fire spreading. Out in Los Angeles, photographers caught Jackson Pierce exploding out of his office building, his face a mask of pure, white-hot fury. Sienna was right behind him, looking pale and frantic. The caption was everywhere. Jackson Pierce in a rage over viral photos of ex-wife, billionaire, and newborn twins. I looked at Camilla, staring at her screen. The past had finally cornered him, not her, and for once, it was Jackson who looked powerless. Jackson looked absolutely terrified. I always knew two things about Jackson Pierce from his visits here. He had to control everything, and he thought Camilla Rhodes was nothing without him. Both of those certainties crumbled when he saw those pictures. I can just picture him in some LA boardroom, surrounded by suits, his phone buzzing off the hook. He probably ignored it at first, trying to explain away some corporate failure. But then everyone else started looking at their phones, their expressions shifting to shock, and he finally had to look. He must have demanded to know what was so damn important. Someone probably just slid a tablet over to him. "You need to see this." And bam, the world would have just caved in on him. A picture of Camilla looking fragile, but held by another man. Not just any man, but Adrian Crowell, a phantom investor with more power than God. Then the second photo. Two bassinets, two infants, his twins. I bet his hands went numb. His throat probably closed up. His heart must have been pounding in his ears, blurring the screen. The headlines would have been screaming at him. "Mystery babies. Billionaire supporting Mrs. Pierce." The whole room probably vanished. He wouldn't have heard a single word after that. Not his meeting being dismissed, or Sienna calling his name. Just the sound of his own lies crashing down. Twins. Camilla and Adrian Crowell. The one man he couldn't bully or buy. The billionaire who despised him for reasons I'm sure he never bothered to understand. No, he must have just repeated that word. He would have blown out of that room, blind to the cameras, the staff, and Sienna trying to grab his arm. I can almost hear her. "Jackson, talk to me." "Not now," he would have snarled, shoving right past her. But she'd follow, her heels clicking like a countdown. "She's doing this to ruin you." He'd have spun on her, making her flinch. She had twins, Sienna. Twins? And you want me to believe it's nothing? He was probably yelling, not caring about the interns who were staring. She'd have moved closer, her voice low. You said she was too fragile to carry a baby. You told me the doctors warned you. She was. He'd snap. There were complications. I saw those complications. I saw the tear-streaked nights. His voice would have cracked then, right under the weight of his own rotten secrets. Complications. Tears, her begging him not to leave her alone. The memories had to be hitting him hard. Sienna would touch his arm again. Jackson, are you certain? Those infants aren't... They can't be mine, he'd say, a knee-jerk reaction. My doctor told me. But then he'd stop. He'd remember that specialist appointment, the diagnosis of temporary infertility, the shots he was supposed to take but didn't, the follow-up he blew off. That single warning he ignored. You could still be fertile for several months. His entire world must have dropped out from under him. Oh God, what if... He wouldn't dare finish the sentence. They're not mine, he'd whisper, trying to convince himself, but Sienna's eyes would be sharp. Then why does the boy look just like you? He'd freeze. What did you say? She'd show him her phone. A close-up of the baby boy, that little nose, that jaw, those eyebrows, a face that would have sent a chill straight through his bones. The resemblance would be undeniable. He'd stumble backward, unable to breathe. No. Impossible. Impossible. But it wasn't. Pure panic would have erupted inside him. Because if they were his twins, then Camilla Rhodes wasn't just a headline. She was holding the one thing that could absolutely ruin him. His legacy, his name, his whole future, and the last little bit of control he had left. He'd grab his coat, his voice raw. I'm flying to New York. Sienna's face would go white. Jackson, hold on. What are you planning to do? He wouldn't even look back. Get the truth. But I think, deep down, he already knew. The truth was coming to destroy him. The rain that night felt personal, slamming against the hospital windows like it was trying to warn us all that something was about to break. In her darkened room, Camilla slept, but not deeply. You never do when you've survived a man like him. Her body ached, her heart was overwhelmed, but her babies were safe in the ICU, stable, breathing, alive. She should have been resting peacefully. But women like her are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Around 2 a.m, her door creaked open. It was my job to check on her, but this was someone else. Camilla's eyes flew open. Pure instinct. She sat right up, her breathing quick and shallow. It was Harper Quinn, her coat slick with rain. I'm so sorry it's so late, she whispered, but I had to get here. Camilla was still shaking off sleep. Harper? What is it? Harper closed the door, and from her bag, she pulled out a folder. I saw the logo even from the hall. Pierce Biosystems Confidential. Camilla's heart must have leaped into her throat. Where did you... Anonymous drop, Harper said. Left at my office an hour ago. The sender wanted you to see this before Jackson gets to New York. I felt a shiver of my own. I was the one who'd found that package at the nurse's station and made sure it got into Harper's hands. Jackson's coming here, Camilla whispered. Harper nodded. He's on a red-eye, and he's coming prepared. Camilla swallowed. What does that mean? Harper opened the file. Photos, emails, financials, medical records, all bearing his signature. But the one on top, the one highlighted and stamped, was the one Harper gave to Camilla. A fertility report, Jackson's fertility report. The one he claimed was just a routine checkup, the one he refused to ever talk about. And there on page 3 was the truth in cold, hard text. Patient shows temporary infertility. Conception remains possible within a 6-month window. Camilla just blinked. I could almost hear the blood rushing in her ears. 6 months. Her babies were conceived 4 months before the divorce was final. Everything inside her seemed to just freeze. He knew, she breathed. He knew he still could. He knew it wasn't impossible. Harper's nod was sharp, and he kept it from you. Rushed the divorce, made you sign everything, knowing he might be the father. A broken sound escaped Camilla's throat. She covered her mouth, her body trembling. All those nights he belittled her. All the times he made her feel like she was the one who was broken. All of that pain and shame. It was all a lie, a manipulation. He let me think I was the broken one, she cried, her voice shattering. He let me think I was the reason for every miscarriage. Her tears weren't just sad, they were furious. It was the anger of a deep betrayal. Harper then handed her a second paper. And this, she said, is what will destroy him. I watched Camilla look down at the page. It was a forfeiture clause, the one Jackson had signed without a second thought, giving up all rights to any child conceived before their divorce was finalized. Legally sound, witnessed, filed, unbreakable. He has no claim to your babies, Camilla, Harper said gently. Not legally, not financially, not in any way. He signed away every bit of control. Camilla pressed a hand to her chest. Relief and rage warring within her. Then why is he coming? She whispered. I exhaled slowly from the hallway, my shift ending. This was my small part. Because he hasn't seen this yet, Harper said. And when he finds out, he's going to lose it all. His company, his name, his engagement. The investors are pulling out, I heard one executive panic. The board is going to eat him alive. I saw Jackson that day. He wasn't a king anymore. He was a cornered animal, preparing for a fight he couldn't win. He was fighting for a kingdom that was already lost. I saw the flight manifest. He was going to New York. As he stormed out of the building, into a car waiting to take him to his reckoning, I made one more anonymous call. A quick tip to a reporter I knew. Jackson Pierce is on his way to NY Mercy Hospital. You might want to be there. For the first time, I didn't feel like a coward. I felt like I'd finally helped balance the scales. I remember the first time I saw his darkness. It was months ago, a flicker of cold anger in his eyes when his wife, Camilla, was a little late for an appointment. I said nothing. Tonight, that flicker is a firestorm. I watch from the nurse's station as he storms into our wing, looking like a man about to break. He finds the hallway, the right door, but then Mr. Crowell is there, a calm, solid presence blocking his path. I see Jackson freeze, his face twisting with hate. You, he spits, and I shrink back, the old fear creeping in. Mr. Crowell's voice is low, but I hear it. You shouldn't be here, Jackson. Jackson's reply is pure venom, but Mr. Crowell is unmoved. He holds up an envelope, and his words, though quiet, cut through the tension. You should see this. Jackson rips it open. I watch his face shift from confusion to disbelief, then to a horror so deep it seems to hollow him out. My own hands are shaking. His signature, I realize. He's seeing his own signature on something terrible. No, he whispers, a broken sound that echoes in the quiet hall. I watch Mr. Crowell deliver the verbal blows, each one landing with brutal precision. You signed away your rights, he says, his voice steady, to any child conceived before the divorce. Jackson's denial is frantic. She tricked me. And then Mr. Crowell says the words that lance my own guilt. You bullied her. You forced her. He's right. I saw the bruises on her soul long before tonight, and I looked away. I let her be alone. Jackson's wild eyes meet mine for a second, and I quickly look down. I'm their father, he chokes out. Mr. Crowell's final sentence is an execution. You are nothing to them. The air leaves Jackson's body in a rush. Mr. Crowell presses his advantage, his voice like iron. Camilla owes you nothing. Jackson's accusation that this was all planned sounds weak and desperate. Mr. Crowell's reply is swift. Your actions planned your downfall. I can almost smell the fury coming off Jackson. Stay out of my family, he growls. Mr. Crowell's response is chillingly calm. Oh, you destroyed your family. Don't rewrite the history you chose. Jackson's hand clenches into a fist, and I know I can't stay hidden any longer. This has to stop. The babies, her peace, it's all on the other side of that door. My heart pounds against my ribs, but I force my feet to move. I step out of the shadows, my voice trembling just a little as I focus only on Mr. Crowell. Mr. Crowell, I say, my words cutting through the hate. The twins are ready for their feeding. Jackson's head whips toward me, his breath catching. They're here, he whispers, his rage forgotten. Right behind that door? Mr. Crowell gives a single, sharp nod, his eyes never leaving Jackson's. You don't get to see them. My small act is done. I've drawn a line. His face just crumpled. I watched Mr. Crowell walk right past him, into the room where a new, safe life was beginning. Jackson Pierce was left standing there, utterly alone, surrounded by the wreckage he'd made. For the first time, he wasn't a titan of industry. He was just a man who had lost. The next morning, the whole world knew. Someone else down the hall had filmed it, and the news was merciless. Jackson Pierce's name was mud. Headlines screamed about his meltdown, about the confrontation. And Camilla, our quiet, resilient patient, had become a hero overnight. The video of Mr. Crowell shielding her door was on every screen, a testament to the truth I had been too scared to speak. The clip was everywhere in hours. Millions of people heard those words that had been locked in my own heart. He destroyed his own family, Mr. Crowell said. Don't rewrite the history you chose. It felt like a public vindication. I imagined Jackson in some car, his phone blowing up, his carefully built world shattering. I heard a rumor that his fiancée, Sienna, called him, but not to offer support. She was panicked, terrified for her own brand. I guess when you build your life on lies, you have no one when the truth comes out. Do you realize what this does to my reputation? She supposedly screamed. Even she was gone. He was finally, completely on his own. Later, I peeked into the room. Camilla was holding her little girl, and Mr. Crowell was feeding her son. His movements so gentle. Sunlight streamed in, bathing them in a soft, golden light. It was the calm after the storm I helped to end. He glanced up and saw me, offering a small, knowing smile. Stronger every day, I heard him murmur to her. She looked down, a faint blush on her cheeks. I don't know about strong, she whispered. Oh, I do, he said back, his voice full of something I could only describe as reverence. I felt a swell of hope for her, for them. Before I moved on, I saw her phone light up the dim room. I could see the headlines popping up on her screen, dozens of them. Then a text from a friend appeared. He's losing everything. The forfeiture clause is airtight. He has no case. Her breath hitched. She hadn't wanted revenge, just peace. Mr. Crowell seemed to sense her conflict. You don't owe him compassion, he said gently. She swallowed hard. I just want him out of our lives. And he will be, Mr. Crowell promised her. A few minutes later, the head nurse came to me. There's a crowd outside, she said. Press? Supporters? Even protesters. Protesters? For Camilla. I walked back to the room to tell her. As the words left my mouth, her eyes widened. People are demanding accountability. I finished. The world was finally fighting for her. I knew he was walking into his own execution. News alert said the board of Pierce Biosystems was meeting, and I pictured that cold, glass-walled room high above the city. The rain was coming down in sheets, just like his life was. He would walk in there, a ghost of the man he was yesterday, his power stripped away by his own actions. He'd try to project authority, but we all saw the truth in that hospital hallway. He was a bully who had finally been stood up to. And as I finished my shift and walked out into the rain, I wasn't afraid anymore. I had done one small, right thing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt clean. I still remember the first twinge of disgust, the day Jackson finalized his divorce with a smirk. Whatever you've seen, sit. Chairman Lee's voice cut through my memory. That one word silenced the room. Jackson froze, then sank into his chair, his jaw clenched. The projector flared to life, not with charts or figures, but with headlines. Pierce CEO hid ex-wife's pregnancy. Public outrage over Jackson Pierce's silence. Biotech scandal. CEO accused of abandoning ailing wife. Each headline was a fresh stab of guilt. We've handled bad press before, Jackson insisted. This is just noise. This isn't noise, board member Santos corrected him. It's a pattern. Another member leaned in. And now potential financial crimes. Jackson's composure finally cracked. What crimes? A folder slid across the table. Several large withdrawals were approved with your login, Chairman Lee said coolly. Millions are missing. I didn't authorize those, Jackson sputtered. My account was compromised. Then why? Lee asked, his voice chillingly calm. Did they originate from your office, on your devices, with your credentials? I watched the blood drain from Jackson's face. Someone hacked me. Santos let out a dry laugh. How convenient. This is Adrian Crowell's doing, Jackson accused, his voice rising. He's setting me up to ruin me. No, Lee said evenly. The timeline matches your own choices. The screen changed. It was Camilla, pregnant and glowing in a hospital bed held by Adrian, the twins in their cribs. The air in the room became thick, unbreathable. Lee steepled his fingers. You deceived us. A dark red blush crept up Jackson's neck. I didn't know. She hid it from me? Lee's gaze was like ice. We have records indicating you were advised that conception was still possible. You knew, yet you concealed it while rushing the divorce. My stomach turned over, Santos added, and we've received a legal document confirming you relinquished all parental rights. The humiliation was a physical presence in the room. And you expect us to believe, Lee said, that after abandoning your wife and trying to erase your children, you should lead a company founded on integrity? Jackson's hand slammed the table. This company is me. No, Lee replied softly. It was. He held up a single sheet of paper. This is a vote for your immediate suspension, pending a full investigation. No, Jackson whispered, his voice fracturing. You can't do this. We can, Santos said, and we are. One by one, our hands went into the air. My own felt heavy with overdue justice. Each vote was a nail in his coffin. Suspended, defeated, erased, the very thing he tried to do to Camilla. This is a mistake, Fawishvegd. The empire is collapsing, Lee stated, because of you. Jackson's phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with a preview from Sienna. We're done. Never contact me. Again. It was the final domino. The company, the fiancé, the reputation, all gone. And miles away in New York, the woman he'd cast aside was finally beyond his reach. But I knew Jackson. He was about to do something desperate, something that would pull all three of them into a place with no return. I watched him leave the boardroom in a trance, oblivious to the rain and the reporters screaming his name. His expensive shoes splashed through puddles as he stumbled toward his car. But he just stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. His entire world, dismantled in 12 hours, the business he created, the woman he showed off, the legacy he crafted, vanished because of Camilla, because of Crowell, because of twins he refused to believe in. He leaned against a garage pillar, pulling at his own hair. How did this happen? He rasped. How did she beat me? I could see the hospital video playing in his mind, just as it was in mine. Exhausted but beautiful, fragile, but strong in Adrian's arms. That image was a testament to every terrible choice he'd made. It wasn't just anger in him now, it was terror. If those twins were his, they carried his name, his legacy, and he'd signed it all away. A decision he couldn't reverse, unless he found new leverage. I saw the ugly spark in his eyes, not with force, but with information. He would dig for something, anything, to destroy Adrian Crowell. If he couldn't get the twins back, he would make sure Adrian could never have their mother. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Marcus?" he said into the phone. "I need dirt on Crowell. Every secret, every vulnerability, everything." I heard a faint, tinny protest from the other end. "I don't care," Jackson snapped. "Find it." Marcus's tone must have turned serious. "You have no idea," Jackson snarled back. "Crowell is tied to people you can't even imagine. He'll bury you." Fear flickered across Jackson's face, quickly replaced by rage. "I'm already buried," he hissed. "So start digging." That night, I couldn't rest. All I could picture was Camilla in New York, holding her son, unaware of the new poison Jackson was unleashing. I saw Adrian beside her, a quiet protector. "You don't have to be here every night," I imagined her saying. "I know," he'd reply. "I want to be." I hoped she was finally feeling safe, a warmth melting away the years of fear Jackson had instilled. "You're thinking too hard," he would gently tease. "I'm overwhelmed," she'd confess. "It's good, but it's a lot." He would lean closer. "You don't have to decide anything right now. All you need to do is heal." My heart ached with a sense of responsibility. Then, a shadow fell over my thoughts. A figure I imagined standing across the street from the hospital. A dark coat, watching the entrance. I could feel Camilla's breath catch in her throat. "Adrienne," she would whisper. "Is that—" I saw Adrian move to the window, his posture shifting into high alert. A man who recognized danger instantly. "It's not Jackson," he would say. "Wrong size? Wrong stance?" "Then who is it?" Adrian would exhale. "Someone watching him. Or us." A chill would go through her. What could that mean? "It means," Adrian would reply, his jaw set, "that Pierce isn't the only player on the board anymore. Someone else has joined the game." And for the first time, a real fear, not for herself, but for her babies, would finally take hold, because the next chapter would not be simple. The watcher wouldn't move. He'd stand there, under a faulty streetlight, his collar up, head cocked as if listening to a frequency no one else could hear. People would rush by, but he'd remain rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the neonatal unit's windows. He could have been a guardian or a hunter. I felt my own skin crawl just thinking about it. "Adrian, who is that man?" Camilla would ask. Adrian would take a long moment to answer, studying the silhouette with the kind of intense calm you only see in men who understand true threat. "Not a reporter," Adrian would murmur. "Then what is he?" Adrian would finally turn to face her. "A complication." Her pulse would jump. "Does Jackson have something to do with this?" Indirectly, Adrian would say. When a CEO as big as Jackson Falls, the wolves always come out. Wolves! The word sent a shiver down my spine. Competitors, investors, agencies, people who smell blood and want to know if he's truly. I still remember that first night, the hum of the monitors a constant worry. I saw his jaw lock when he whispered about people wanting the twins. She clutched her daughter, a look of pure terror on her face. Tiny babies. What could they want? He said something about bloodlines, about enemies needing leverage. Leverage. The word hung in the sterile air, cold and sharp. I watched him promise her safety, that no one would get near them, but you could see the fear was already inside her. Miles away, I later imagined, her husband was unraveling in some rundown motel, the powerful man gone. His phone probably rang. An unknown caller. A voice asking about the company, then interrupting. It's not about the board. It's about the twins. The silence that must have followed. I can almost feel it. The pure dread constricting his throat. What about them? I picture a cold voice explaining how desperate men are useful tools. What do you want? I imagine him asking. And the voice replying, it's about what you want. Power, a way back. A chill must have shot through him. Meet me, or you lose them too. The call ends. He's furious, I bet. Someone else was after those babies, seeing him as a pawn. He probably insisted they were his, my children. But he had to know he had no claim, nothing but a dangerous need. Back on my shift, Adrian asked me, that nurse was me, to watch the twins for an hour so she could try to sleep. But rest was impossible for her. She kept seeing the man outside. I felt it too. Every shadow in that corridor seemed to stretch, hiding something. An hour later, Adrian came back, his face like stone. I was checking charts nearby and heard him say he'd identified the watcher. I saw her jolt upright. Former intel, he said. A fixer. The kind of person hired to make problems disappear. I saw her gasp. Disappear? He tried to calm her, saying the man was just gathering intel. Not on the babies, he corrected. On you. On why a man like Jackson would implode for the woman he left behind. Her fear was palpable. I don't want this war, she pleaded. I watched him kneel, promising her they'd finish it together. When she asked about Jackson, his voice turned to ice. He's going to learn a lesson. I saw him look toward the window, right where I'd seen the man lurking in the shadows. His jaw set, and I knew things were escalating. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here, and they were all caught in it. I was there when they discharged Camilla Rhodes. She looked so tired, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes as she held her babies. Adrienne was taking her to his place, somewhere safe. She just nodded, too worn out to object. With watchers at the hospital and Jackson on the edge, she knew she needed protection. It happened fast. I was walking to my car in the garage when I saw their SUV pull in. Suddenly, another car's headlights blinded me. It was speeding. I heard the scream of tires on the wet concrete. I saw Adrienne move like lightning, shouting something, as he threw his arm over Camilla, protecting the babies. Then the other car's door flew open, and Jackson Pierce fell out. He was a mess, drenched and wild-eyed, nothing like the CEO I'd seen in magazines. He looked completely lost. I heard him scream her name, his voice breaking. Adrienne got out and stood between them, a solid wall. I couldn't hear every word, but the anger was clear, something about his wife, and Adrienne's cold reply. He told Jackson he had no right. Then Jackson lunged. Adrienne was faster, pinning him against a pillar with his arm to his throat. Jackson choked, sputtering something like, "You don't get it." He gasped out that he needed to see them. Then Camilla stepped out, clutching her baby. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Why now? He just stood there, rain on his face, and finally choked out, "I think they're mine." A terrible quiet fell over the garage. I saw her hands shake. "They were always yours," I heard her say. I never lied. His face just crumbled. "Why didn't you tell me?" he begged. I could imagine her reply. "Would you have listened? You said I was broken. You left me." His gaze shot between them all, frantic. "I made a mistake," he must have pleaded. "I can fix it. I want to be their father." I saw her just stare at him, and I could feel the shift from where I stood. A change. It wasn't pity or anger. It was just clarity. "No," she told him. "You can't." I heard her voice grow stronger. "You gave up your rights. You chose this long before they were born. You don't get a do-over just because you're sorry now." He stammered something about not knowing. "You didn't want to know," she shot back. He winced. Adrienne let him go then, moving to her side like a guardian. "So it's over?" Jackson's voice cracked. "You lost them when you lost me," she said, holding her son closer. "I loved you," he whispered, a last, desperate plea. Her expression changed, not forgiving, but honest. "You loved being in charge," she told him. When that was gone, so was everything else. He looked broken, the rain stripping away his arrogance. Then Adrienne spoke, his voice low and firm. "Leave now. This is the last time. Don't come back." Jackson just stared at the three of them, this new family, with an empty look. He turned and disappeared into the night. I watched Camilla sag against Adrian, finally breathing free. I knew then that this was far from over. The next day, the whole city was electric. When I got to work, the news was everywhere. It wasn't about money or gossip. It was about her, Camilla, the woman who had been through hell and was still standing. I saw the crowds outside Adrian's building on the news. People with signs that said, "Justice for moms, we stand with Camilla." I felt a lump in my throat. Power doesn't make a family. Love does. Inside, things were calmer. I had to deliver some paperwork to Adrienne's suite and saw her for a moment, sitting in the morning sun with the twins. She looked so peaceful. Her lawyer, Harper Quinn, came in. "It's time, if you're ready." Camilla looked down at her children, at their tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and took a deep breath. "I'm ready." Adrian was there, and he just held out his hand for her to take. It was a simple, supportive gesture. She took it. The press conference was small and private, away from the chaos. I saw her walk in on a monitor. The camera flashes didn't make her flinch. She seemed so centered, so strong. I saw Harper adjust the microphone. For her, "I feel ready," she whispered. On the monitor, I heard her begin, her voice clear. "I never asked for this attention. I just wanted a family with the man I loved." Her voice hitched for a second. "But life can be cruel. People can use your trust against you." Then her voice grew firm. "But life also gives you a second chance." She looked right into the camera. "I protected my children from someone who told me I wasn't good enough. But I am, and we deserve to live without being afraid." It was then I saw him, a reporter trying to sneak past a checkpoint down the hall. My heart pounded. For days I'd done nothing. Not this time. I walked over to security and pointed him out. "That man isn't supposed to be here." I went back to the monitor as Harper held up a document. "This," she announced, "is the legally binding forfeiture of parental rights, signed by Jackson Pierce. It is final, irrevocable, and will be fully enforced." I watched the press conference live on my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the room on the screen. Harper continued, There will be no custody hearing, no visitation, and no financial claims. The children belong solely, entirely, and legally to Camilla. Flashbulbs erupted. I felt like I could finally take a full breath. And then, the final, perfect blow. Additionally, evidence of Mr. Pierce's fraudulent financial activities has been delivered to federal authorities. A formal inquiry is now open. Gasps, murmurs. I saw Adrian's jaw tighten with grim satisfaction. Justice had arrived like a thunderstorm. Across the country, surrounded by a media circus outside his fallen company, Jackson watched the same feed. His face went white. The board's vote, the investigation, the forfeiture clause. That single piece of paper I anonymously sent. I still remember the first day he took credit for her work in the boardroom. I saw the light go out in her eyes, and my silence was my complicity. He tried to bury her spirit, but tonight, watching the cameras devour him, I realized he only buried himself. This wasn't her payback. It was the bill coming due. Hours later, I saw a photo of her penthouse, the twins finally safe. She was with Adrian, who offered quiet strength, not dominance. I imagined him telling her she deserved more than just getting by, that she deserved a real future. She leaned into his support, not claimed or rushed, just breathing free. A peace I had helped deny her for years. I watched that skyline glow, and for the first time, I felt a sliver of hope. She was whole, her children were protected, her honor was restored. Her past was finally behind her, and an entire life lay ahead. For those of us who just watched, Camila's fight was a mirror. It reminded me of what the Stoics believed. The obstacle in the path becomes the path. His cruelty didn't shatter her. It forged her. It was like Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The thing that impedes action inspires action." Every wound she endured became an opening. Every loss became a new beginning. Life doesn't always grant us the closure we wish for, but it offers a chance to become more than the people who tried to diminish us. And with that heavy truth weighing on me, I knew I had to rebuild my own integrity. I needed that peace, too. So I did more than just witness. I opened my laptop, found the email chain he thought he'd deleted, the one proving it was all her idea. My finger hovered over the mouse, a small, anonymous act of courage. One click to send it to the press, my truth finally joining hers. The story you are about to read is entirely fictional. While it may draw inspiration from universal human experiences, it does not depict real people or actual events. Any perceived parallels are coincidental and should not be interpreted as deliberate representations.